Welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm Valerie Steele, the director of the museum at MFIT, and this is the Fashion Culture program. We are so happy to have our friend Hal Rubenstein join us again tonight with a new book. He's so prolific, Dressing the Part, about our favorite television programs and their fashions. And he's going to be joining us on stage tonight by Eric Daman, whose work includes the TV show Gossip Girl. He's going to be talking about, decades worth of the best fashion on TV, the fashion that reflected our lives, and the fashion that influenced where fashion was going. Or I should say maybe the costume that influenced where fashion was going. Please join me in welcoming Hal and Eric.
Good evening. Let me just move these. Can you hear me properly? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm glad you're all here. There's a lot of you. I'm very happy. From where I stand here, it's kind of Swiftian, except I don't have any jet lag, so it's good. So yay for me, which means I have a lot of energy to talk about a book that really was just such a kick in the head to work on and to produce. I mean, who doesn't love television? I mean, who doesn't watch television? Okay, maybe Paul Giamatti's character in The Holdover doesn't look at it, but look at him. He's a mess. And why is he a mess? Because he doesn't watch television. Okay, for 75 years, television has been everybody's in-house pro bono stylist, tempting and inspiring us when we're trying to decide what we're going to zip up the back and button down the front, pull over, step into, wrap around, tie up, when we're on our way to work, when we're going on a date, when we're dressing up for a wedding, when we're dressing down for a booty call, when we're going on vacation, when we want to meet our friends at home, or actually just stay at home and watch more television. Dressing the Part is a celebration of the medium's ingratiating influence over us. Surprisingly, it is also the first book ever done that celebrates television fashion. TV used to have a monopoly on guidance, but today there's a formidable competition. It's on your laptop, it's on your phone, but despite the internet and social media's ability to galvanize retailers and marketers, like it's some kind of shortcut to style, television remains more persuasive than ever. And the key to the medium's power is the difference between fashion and costume design. Fashion has always been a rarefied target. At its most creative, at its most original, like 2 weeks ago, John Galliano's show, if any of you got to see it in Paris, which was head-spinning and dazzling, but it comes packaged with so much daunting originality that most of us just fear that, I don't know, do we have the guts or the balls to pull it off? So when you see clothes on a model, that's no help either. Why? Because since besides the vapid stare and that expression that life is so dour that even a puppy wouldn't help, this is not really very relatable. Costume design, however, is rooted in character. It gives us a clue as to who a wearer is the moment they walk into a room before they even say a word. Plus, it's usually worn in some recognizable semblance of reality. And it never fails. When we grow to admire or love these characters, we start repeating their catchphrases, we start adopting their body language, and then we set off in pursuit of clothes so we can dress the part, and we can be in their orbit. Costume design is a very simple equation. Style plus identification equals transference. For example, every guy I know in the 80s had a Tom Selleck porn mustache for Magnum PI. Even 20 years after Friends, there are still millions of women who have their hair cut and are Rachel. And Friends, the really rabid fans of Real Housewives of pick out of whatever the city, don't want to be like them, they want to be them. And you can ask my husband, I spend most of the winter living in turtlenecks. Because when I was 15, I thought there was no one cooler than David McCallum, Azealia Kuryakin, and the Man from U.N.C.L.E. And I still believe that. But what I found most surprising when I started researching this book, besides spending 500 hours watching television, is that no one had written a book about this. I couldn't believe it, and neither could the costume designers that I spoke to, which is why I am so grateful to over 24 of some of the most gifted and talented artists for their captivating stories, their illuminating insights, their meticulous research, their delicious gossip, and their glorious sketches. I marvel at their talents. When you look at Donna Zakowska's rapturous wardrobes for the marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Salvador Perez's stories about how he taught Mindy Kaling to believe that she was beautiful before he actually gave her any of those clothes. Patrick Norris, who turned an entire generation of high school students from away from dressing like they're part of Beverly Hills 90210 to look like the grunge idols on My So-Called Life. Even Michael Kors talks about how being on Project Runway changed his whole perception of how he actually looked at the catwalk. This book has been so much fun. I wish I could throw my beret in the air just like Mary Tyler Moore, except I look like shit in hats. So let's take a look at some of these shows, and I hope you'll have as good a time as I do. Everything, well, put it this way. Philo Farnsworth invented what we now know as the television set in 1927. But when we talk about TV, all roads go back to Lucy. Lucy is everything. It was the first television show to be shot in front of a live audience. The first television show to use a three-camera setup. It was so revolutionary that Lucille Ball she was in film, she was known as Queen of the Bees, which is not exactly the highest compliment in the world, but she also had a very successful radio show called My Favorite Husband. Except Desi was not her husband on the show because it was just radio. When it came time to be on TV, the CBS executives were terrified that the American TV audience would not accept this redheaded all-American woman from Jamestown, New York, married to a Cuban band leader, even though they had already been married for 11 years. So Lucy and Desi used their own money to create their pilot. They used their own money to shoot most of the first season and used their own clothes on the set. By the end of the first year, they were number 3. After that, they were number 1. When Lucy gave birth to Desi Arnaz Jr. at home and little Ricky on TV, 44 million Americans watched her as Fred and Ethel and Ricky screwed up the way to get to the hospital. 44 million Americans. Now, that's 1/3 of the population of the United States. That's number 1. And 2, there were only 17 million TVs at that point. But the most important element, though, here was not so much that she gave, in fact, she actually arranged so that she would have a cesarean in real life on the same day that she gave birth to little Ricky on the show. So it coincided. But the important part here was that up until this point in time, pregnancy was not something that was considered fashionable. When a woman was with child. In fact, CBS wouldn't even allow the use of the word pregnant on the entire run of the show during that season. The episode, actually, when she goes to the hospital, is called Lucy is enceinte, which is a French slang for being pregnant. But in fact, at the end of the first season of Lucy, she was actually pregnant with her first child, with Lucy Arnaz, and they did the usual. They hid her behind a sofa, they hid her behind lamps, whatever it was. By the time she was pregnant with Ricky, little Ricky on TV, or Desi, in real life, on the 3rd season, the show was a powerhouse. And Lucy said, you know something? I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm not doing what Grace Kelly did. The reason why Hermes has the Kelly bag is because when Grace Kelly was pregnant with Prince Albert, she would use the bag to hide her stomach. And Lucy said, I'm not having any of this. This is, I'm pregnant, I'm fine. There should be shrines set up to Lucille Ball for creating the $18 billion maternity industry. Because not only did she proudly wear the maternity clothes, the thing that was most important is One, she never changed any of the slapstick. She didn't tone it down. She didn't sit in the couch. And more important than any of it, Desi still looked at her as an object of desire. He still loved her. So not only did she create the maternity industry, she just basically changed the way our entire culture looked at women who were pregnant. To show you how smart, before we leave this, to show you how smart Lucy is, okay? When they first developed the TV show, shows were shot on kinescopes, and then they would tape over them. That's why you can't find a lot of the old episodes of TV shows that were popular in the early 50s. Desi and Lucy basically said, you know something, we'll take a lower salary. Why don't just give us the tapes of the shows? Lucy and Desi created reruns, and therefore made a fortune, which is how they bought Desilu Studios. Speaking of Desilu Studios, during the early 60s, when the space race got really busy, there was a producer named Gene Roddenberry who was parsing around a pilot for a TV show about space travel, and nobody would bite. Lucy watched the pilot and said, that's really cool. And if it wasn't for Lucy, there'd be no Star Trek. Everybody loves Mary. How could you not? Let me get the year right. In 1950, 82% of grown women were married. In 1970, 61% of women were married. There was, in the early 70s, there was women's lib. There was Woodstock. But when the pilot came in for the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Mary was supposed to be a divorcee. CBS, once again, CBS said the head of research at CBS came in and said, America will not tolerate a divorcee any more than they will a show about Jews, people with mustaches, or anyone who lives in New York City. Seinfeld, Mad About You. I can go down the list. Magnum PI. It's unbelievable, the stupidity. Now, Mary already had a reputation that she got through the Dick Van Dyke Show when she became Laura Petrie. Now, if you look at all the shows from before the Dick Van Dyke Show, we had established after the war, something appeared in our culture that had never been there before, which was a middle class. How do you dress? How do you behave if you're middle class? Because it didn't exist before the war. It didn't exist in the 20s or 30s. And those TV shows like the Donna Reed Show, Father Knows Best, all of those basically, though they were like primers of how we should possibly do this, where we're elegant but not that elegant. So Dad always wore like a jacket and tie to dinner, and Mom, you know, June Cleaver and all those people, she managed to cook and clean wearing a crinoline shirtwaist with high heels. Mary basically said, you know something? When I'm at home, I'm usually in a pair of slacks and flats. CBS, so she brings in a pair of capri pants. CBS censors again, sorry to keep dumping on them, freaked out. They said, okay, you can wear those pants, only one scene per episode. And why? But we're going to have somebody there to check on, here we go, cupping. Figure it out. Cupping? They were worried about the way the pants would caress her butt. Nevertheless, Mary Tyler Moore wore those pants, and by the end of the first season, you couldn't find a pair of capri pants in America. So she had pretty much clout when she got to the Mary Tyler Moore Show. They changed the show, the pilot, so that she wasn't a divorcee anymore, but she had actually paid her boyfriend's way through medical school, and then he dumped her, which, if you think about it, is even more disgusting. Nevertheless, it was the first television show in which a grown woman sets out on her path not to get a husband, but to have a career, to have a life of her own. Remember, Mary never had a steady boyfriend. You never really saw her have sex, but you know she wasn't a virgin. But the whole idea was her looking basically like we all do as we get older, for a nuclear family. You saw the mother and father occasionally, but it really is about finding friendship as a grown person, as a grown woman. What was remarkable also was her wardrobe. If you remember a couple of years prior to that, when Marlo Thomas was doing That Girl, which is in the book, it was amazing that Anne-Marie, basically, during the 5 years that show was on the air, I don't think Anne-Marie ever had a job that lasted more than 5 days. Somehow she had a bottomless closet of 975 A-line dresses that never repeated. She had a limitless wardrobe. Mary's people, Ruth Ellis, went ahead and made a deal, the first time of product placement deal in the history of television with Evan Picone. And basically, Evan Picone created her entire wardrobe. And one of the keys to it was that because it was a wardrobe, she would repeat items. So that vest that you see got one with a skirt, got one with a blouse, got one with a jacket. Rhoda was supposed to be a schlub. Okay, but Valerie Harper is not a schlub. And in fact, after the first season on her own, went and lost about 30 pounds, came back and she looked ravishing. So how do we differentiate her? Well, Mary's assistant used to dress really bohemian. And Valerie picked up on that, said, quick, figure out how to tie that rag around my head and wrap it around my skirt, and I'm going to wear that. And then you had Phyllis basically dress up as if she ran away from Spence. And so between the three of them, they actually created an entire line of sportswear for all American women to look at in the 70s, and not kids wear, grown-up women. There would be no 80s without Dynasty. It is everything. It is everything. In fact, when we started Details magazine in the early 80s, we used to have Dynasty dinners. But if it was your turn, you basically had to make something like beef Wellington or serve like caviar and Ritz crackers, and we would all go home and get dressed. We'd all actually run to Pat Field's clothing store downtown, which was the center of the universe, and we'll get to her later, and pull up outfits. But Dynasty defined the 80s. Hair could never be too big, fur could never be too wide, shoulders could never be too high. The funny thing is, when the show first started out, it was not a hit. It didn't give its competition, Dallas, any competition at all. But at the end of the first season, Blake Carrington was on trial for the accidental murder of his son's for his son Stephen's lover's death, which on one hand, thinking through the 80s, is both inclusive and homophobic at the same time. And as the trial goes on, all of a sudden Fallon, the daughter, goes, this woman walks in, you only see her from the back, dressed in white with a big hat, and she went, oh no, it's Mother! And then it ends, and we don't have no idea who it is. Why did we have no idea who it is? Because Aaron Spelling, the producers, didn't know who it was. They tried to get Sophia Loren to do the show, but she turned it down. And Spelling remembered Joan Collins from a fantasy island that they had done and insisted that it had to be her. Sure enough, turns around, and Nolan Miller, who was the designer for Dynasty, Spelling had first come in to Nolan Miller and said, I have a show you're going to love, because it's all about being rich, 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 and I never want to see anybody wearing an outfit more than once. His initial budget for the show was $15,000, which is basically $50,000 in today's money. When Joan came in, it changed to $25,000. And then when Diane Carroll came in, it changed to $35,000, which is the equivalent of about $115,000 a week for clothing. But what made Joan made the show, and what made it the show was a quote from Nolan Miller. You could load Joan up with an envelope bag, a fur throw over her shoulder, a cigarette, and a martini, and she'd still be able to stir the olive. She could handle accessories better than anyone I have ever known. There were no less than 7 clothing lines that were developed because of the success of Dynasty. In fact, at one point, Bloomingdale's bought all of them and decided they would have this huge opening on 3rd Avenue in their flagship store. The night before, thousands of people lined up And when the store opened at 9 in the morning, they basically bombarded the place. They had to turn the elevators down, they had to close the escalators, and escort the entire cast who had been invited to be there out through the freight elevators. At one point in the 5th or 6th year of Dynasty, they actually decided they were going to, it was after like the Moravian massacre or something like that, where the only person who really died was Ally McGraw because her contract was up. So, but they decided they were going to change course and that they would get rid of shoulder pads, they would get rid of the high glam. The next day, it was a cover story in the Wall Street Journal. The next day, the CEO of Bergdorf Goodman called up Nolan Miller and said, "Have you lost your marbles? It's all of our clothes here." They actually had to issue a retraction and continue to do it. Oh, by the way, one thing, the shoulder, Linda Evans almost never wore shoulder pads. Her shoulders were that big. No, she's a size 12 on top and a size 6 on the bottom. Those were actually her shoulders. Joan wore shoulder pads. Okay, Soul Train. This is a seminal show for two groups. It's a unanimous consensus of all the information that I read from sociologists, performers, civil rights activists, educators, that this was the most vital and empowering show in TV history for people of color. It was the first time anyone ever created a show that was aimed at black people in America. Don Cornelius, first time anybody ever saw ads, Afro Sheen, shows aimed at people who were not white. Don Cornelius was very specific about elevating the experience of black people in America to be young, gifted, and black. And he was really specific about, he had a dress code for these kids. He gave them not dance classes, but he gave them sort of culture classes and how to behave on camera. We have an interview in the book with Rosie Perez, who basically got discovered being a Soul Train dancer. But the show became so important in our culture that when you look at the list of artists who appeared on this show, Curtis Mayfield, Aretha Franklin, Tina Turner, Marvin Gaye, Gladys Knight, Stevie Wonder, Barry White, James Brown, Al Green. It's incredible. Everybody wanted to be on this show. Now, the other people the show was important for, if during the 70s you were like me and everybody else I knew who went out 5 nights a week, this show taught you how to dance. This show taught you how to dress. This show told you where to go. So at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, I would actually go in my living room and move all my furniture out and call my friend Charlie in Brooklyn, and we would rehearse. We would rehearse watching this show. Where do you think Michael Jackson learned how to moonwalk? This show. Funky Chicken, pop and locking, breakdancing, all of it started on Soul Train. Soul Train lasted for 30 years, the longest running syndicated show in the history of television. And elevating for those people who were black, and for those who were not, they still offered you love, peace, and soul. Miami Vice. Brandon Tartikoff, who was the head of NBC, went to Michael Mann, the director, and said, "Okay, I'll give you 2 words. MTV Cops. I want a show that's MTV Cops." It just so happened, it was 1984, it just so happened that Michael Mann had just seen the 1983 Brian De Palma film Scarface. Have you ever seen it? It's delusional. It's absurd. It's Al Pacino as this Latin drug king, basically, who has mountains of cocaine. Back there like chandeliers all over the room. And the film is so over the top. And yet it's riveting because what it does, it basically creates Miami as this sort of Valhalla of hedonism. So basically using that as his playbook, Michael Mann decides, okay, we're going to go down to Miami and make Cops there. Now, if you've ever been to Miami and spent any time in Miami, especially in the summertime, it's goddamn hot. It's hot, it's sweaty, it basically everything sticks to you. This is the early 80s, Reaganomics. I was working at Cafe Luxembourg, uptown. At that point, it was the hottest restaurant in the city, but the problem was in the early 80s, we got infected by something called yuppies. And they would come in their little three-piece suits and their snotty little attitude, and they were horrific. And they were lousy tippers, too. And knew nothing about wine. Anyway, what Michael Mann did with Jody Tillin, Eduardo Castro, and the costume designer said, no, we're going to create a completely different wardrobe for these people. It's Miami. No one so out went Brooks Brothers suits, and in comes unconstructed linen jackets in sherbet colors, silk T-shirts from Vittorio Ricci, from Gianni Versace, from Hugo Boss. Actually, it was more Hugo Boss than Versace, though people don't really realize that. Hal Rubenstein, who was the fashion director for Bloomingdale's at the time, said that this show was the greatest thing that ever happened to Italian fashion. No socks, no ties. Basically, however, the show became an instant hit. And what happens when you have a show that's an instant hit is that people want to go to Miami to see Miami Vice. Well, Miami was really cool in the 50s. You know, Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack, the Eden Rock, the Fontainebleau. By the 80s, my grandmother retired and used to stay at a little hotel called the Sorrento Sand and Sun with a hot plate. Basically, what Miami was in the early 80s was God's waiting room. So what happened was, people came down there looking for, like, Miami Vice. There's none of it here. To their credit, the Miami Beach Land Development, Real Estate Development Corporation basically jumped on the pedals fast, basically got as much pastel paint as they possibly could, and did this rapid-fire renovation of the entire city so that it would actually look like Miami Vice when you got down there. And it stuck. Because by the time the show was over, at the end of the 80s, early 90s, every single photographer, from Mario Testino to Bruce Weber, everybody, I was at the New York Times then doing men's fashion, everybody shot down in Miami. It became the place to be, and it stuck. There is no show that had more influence on how we look, on how we dress. You can't underestimate the power of Sex and the City. But what's so extraordinary about what Darren Star did with Sex and the City? You got to remember what New York City was like in the early 90s. Okay, if you're too young, I'll tell you. Okay. This was a time when actually Giuliani came in and did something good, because there was so much crime in the city. The city was considered to be, by anyone who didn't live here, as basically noisy, rat-infested, scary, full of graffiti, and full of people who will hurt you. Sex and the City shows up, and suddenly it's Disneyland for adults. You look at this bright and shiny TV show that basically says to women in their 30s, who was Sarah Jessica Parker, and their 40s, with some of the other women, basically, come here, because people are going to think you look good. You're going to be sexy. You can have sex. You can have lots of sex. You can have fabulous clothes. You can go to incredible places. You can drink Cosmos to your heart's content. Not only did the show become an object lesson in getting people to get Fendi baguettes and Manolo Blahnik pumps, everything it touched, from the mediocre Magnolia Bakery on down, truly mediocre. The worst black and white cakes ever. Anyway, but it was on that show, and there were still busloads that stopped in front of those bakeries to get this stuff. It didn't not only change the perspective of how we saw women who basically had left the first stage and were approaching, I don't want to use the word middle age because I don't think 30 is middle age, but basically become more mature. It not only changed that, but it became this love letter to New York. And basically helped, Right before the pandemic, New York wound up being the most popular tourist attraction in the United States, more so than Disney World. And this show is partially responsible for it. And the person who led the charge was Sarah Jessica Parker. Not only that, what's also important in the show was that the genius behind the way this show looked, these clothes, was Pat Field. The house, oh, she deserves the credit. I'd say about a third of the people who basically are costume designers in this book at one point or another all worked for Pat. Pat had a store, first on 10th and then on the Bowery, but the House of Field was really, it was a clubhouse, it was a hair and makeup salon, it was a one-stop gay shopping experience for Halloween, it was a drag emporium, it was a community center, it was an employment area for LGBT youth, for club kids in the 80s. Basically, club kids, you think that Madonna ruled? Madonna didn't rule. Pat Field ruled. And this is a woman, epic costume designer, doesn't sew, doesn't sketch. But her taste was incredible. Remember the little ballerina tutu that runs at the beginning of the show? She found it in the bottom of a remainder bin for $5. And basically went to Darren Star and says, this is what she has to wear in the opening. And Darren Star said, no way. And Sarah backed her up and said, yeah, way. And basically that ballerina skirt, everybody wound up producing it. The greatest thing about the show is basically it created a love affair with the city. It created a love affair and a sense of friendship with women to each other, that you would always get supported no matter what would happen, especially if somebody broke up with you on a Post-it. Mad Men. Matthew Weiner, who created Mad Men, was basically the executive producer of The Sopranos. And he wanted to return to a time after The Sopranos where people still believed in Camelot, where people drooled over two-door hardtops and smoked like crazy because cigarettes were sexy back then. An individual style made an impression, whether especially in the workforce. And he wanted sharp edges. So he created this whole look with John Dunn, who created the clothes for the pilot, and then with Jodie, I just drew a blank on her name. But the whole idea of the show was the sharpness, and each one of these characters in Mad Men had specific costumes that told you all about them. Roger Sterling, who was the boss, he was always dressed sharper than everybody else, double-breasted suit, then had a whole change of life experience, got divorced, and started sports cars, and all of a sudden aviator glasses. By the way, the sale of aviator glasses quadrupled after Miami Vice. And then, of course, you had John Hamm's character, who, by the way, always wore gray. Always wore gray. Why? Because he was a mystery. Because his whole life was a lie. But then you look at the clothes that the women in the show wore, Betty and Peggy, and you see each one of them, one trying to be the perfect housewife, one of them knowing that her curves are going to get everything she ever wanted, and Peggy, who basically is in a man's world and basically dresses like a man at the beginning, but slowly becomes more feminine as she gets power in the show. So the show is also about how clothes help you transmit the sense of power. There were 3 different clothing collections created for both Banana Republic and for Brooks Brothers based on the show. All 3 of them sold out. And I actually think that's the best menswear has ever looked. And I will never wear pleated pants again because I think that really is the coolest way to look. Gossip Girl. I want to read you something. I call this person up to the stage. The only thing that keeps me from watching John Schwartz's next show, he did The OC and then he did Gossip Girl, with the glee of someone who accidentally got locked inside of Bergdorf Goodman for the evening, is that I can't get past my insane jealousy of costume designer Eric Daman. It's the dream gig perusing rack after rack of the most covetable clothes from 3 fashion capitals and then choosing the gorgeous person who gets to wear them. This is work? No. Being Mariah Carey's dance coach, that's work. But getting to dress Blake Lively every day would make me higher than Zendaya in Euphoria. I'd like you to meet Eric Daman. How did you first get involved with the show? Got a mic?
I don't have a mic.
No, it's just there.
Sitting on mic?
I think you're sitting on mic, yeah.
Okay. Mic's on. I had a meeting with Stephanie Savage, who's the creator of Gossip Girl, and I went in and I pulled tier sheets and went in with a presentation, and she had also pulled tier sheets and had a presentation for me, and we literally had almost page for page the exact same tier sheets. That once, there was no Google image search at this point, so it was literally pulling tier sheets from the magazines, and we just sat and were relishing fashion and had the exact same references, and it just felt like something very special was about to happen.
But at the beginning, the show wasn't a hit when it first started.
It was not. It was a very small show on the CW.
You had no budget.
We had no budget. There was no, the designers, big designers did not want to work with us. I come from an editorial background. I worked with Pat West on Sex and the City for many years and had contacts with a lot of great New York designers that we got to pull in. But as far as the big fashion houses, there was, that we didn't have any of that first season.
But after that first season, there was a writer's strike. And so what the CW did was they took that cast and threw them all over the place. They were everywhere. That old phrase, they went to the opening of envelopes. But more importantly than that, a very connected person fell in love with the show.
Anna Wintour's daughter, B, at the time, urban legend has it, was a huge fan of the show and got her mom to watch it.
Anna Wintour's daughter.
Anna Wintour's daughter. And Anna, I think had been seeing Blake around and had ended up having dinner with Blake for a Vogue spread, and they got along very, very well. And then Anna ended up introducing Blake to Karl Lagerfeld. The simple things in life. And then one thing led to another, and back when we were doing Gossip Girl, we were calling all of the big houses, all the major fashion brands, because we really, we wanted to editorialize and really have a fashion impact, and that was kind of the vision of it. And everyone was always saying who else do you have? Who has said yes? Ferragamo was do you have Chanel? Everyone was always do you have Chanel? Do you have Chanel? Do you have Chanel? And so, Anna Wintour's daughter liked the show. Anna had dinner with Blake. Blake met Karl. Suddenly we had Chanel.
And after they had Chanel, basically, this is the thing. It's the first TV show for this happened. Pat could get anything she wanted for Sex and the City, but she was asking. She would ask Versace. You would ask Dolce & Gabbana. In this case, boxes showed up.
Boxes would show up. All of a sudden, it was just the deluge. Right from the runway, Pucci, everything from Italy, unsolicited. We would it was unheard of, the amount of amazing, incredible boxes. Prior to that, you would fax requests from lookbooks, and you'd hope that one thing of the 50 things you'd request would show up, and then suddenly, after the major houses realized that Chanel was sending us stuff, all of a sudden it was just box after box of incredible one-of-a-kind pieces, and again runway pieces, and just was really a wonderful moment.
How did that affect how Blake and Leighton Meester looked at the clothes and what they wanted, or did they make decisions based on that as well?
Blake and Leighton were very different in how they interacted with clothing. Blake from the get-go, really, she loved clothing. She wanted to be a fashionista. She wanted to be the Blake Lively she is today. Yeah. That was part of the vision. And Leighton, in a different way, liked the clothing, liked dressing up, but knew that Blair Waldorf was a character. Right. And was a little bit more of an old Hollywood actor in that way. So Leighton would really look to me to help create Blair's costumes and come in and put on whatever I decided for her, which was fantastic. She loved that we were getting all these amazing designers and we could, dial everything up in a way. But Blake had a very symbiotic relationship with Serena, where she loved to come in, I would prepare the room with all the like Serena selects, and then we would play dress up together for like 3 hours and make all these incredible outfits together.
On the new show, is it still the same way, or is it different?
The new show, Gossip Girl for HBO, was similar. I think everyone was very, very excited. A lot has changed in the fashion world and the game of like lending. I think we peaked what designer lending was like during Gossip Girl.
Right.
And I think it was kind of taken advantage of a little bit by other shows and mistreated, and then a lot of designers started saying no to shows.
Well, I think it just became diluted.
It became diluted. I think everyone was like, oh, we have to be on these shows, we have to address these young kids, and then suddenly like these young kids are becoming the new celebutantes, and then that faded away. But I think with the new Gossip Girl, because there was such excitement, like I was the only thread that came from the original Gossip Girl.
Okay.
And I think because of that, there was a lot of eyes on us and like what the design was going to be and how we're going to evolve. Like, are we still doing the Blair Waldorf look? Or are we evolving into this new Gen Z world, which was a big part of. We wanted to embrace the Gen Z-ness of what's going on in Manhattan right now. And I think the designers were very, very excited once they saw that we were doing something fresh and inspired and exciting in Manhattan.
Did you do research by hanging out at the schools?
I did for the original Gossip Girl, like a creeper. I was hanging out with a Polaroid camera because we didn't have phone cameras on our phones at that point, so I had like a secret Polaroid that would kind of like stand around outside Chapin and like see what was going on style-wise. The only way to actually get pictures of that was to kind of snap them myself, and then you'd see like these gangs of like there's the Marc Jacobs girls who have the little Marc Jacobs backpacks, or you'd see like the Tory Burch flats. Tory Burch flats at the time were like a huge thing, and same thing but they were very different. It's kind of subcultures of what fashions these girls were actually wearing, but they were wearing high designer brands.
Yeah. Well, there's one other shot I want to show them. There's the cast.
And a beautiful cast to dress, and it was,
Yeah,
it was really like
it's a knockout.
it was a moment.
But speaking of Tory Burch, either way, or you can sit here for Q&A. It's up to you.
I'll go back. I just want to say thank you for making a book that, represents costume designers and including me and all this. This is an amazing book, and I just would like to have a round of applause for Hal, because it really means a lot from a designer point of view.
Thank you. Okay. Scandal. You see that white trench coat on the left? That's a Tory Burch trench coat. $750, and that Tory Burch trench coat had to be in stock for the 7 years this show was on the air, which is odd, because this is a show in where everybody in Scandal is rotten. No one in this show is good. Think about it. No, even Olivia Pope becomes a monster by the end. So why do you keep rooting for them? There was something canny about what Shonda Rhimes did with this show that created these characters who were so strong and so powerful that somehow, against your better judgment, you kept rooting for them because they seemed so mesmerizingly fearless that you actually were jealous of their power. But one of the incredible things and this was just in social media, was coming up. Lynn Paulo is the costume designer for Scandal. Scandal was the first show to ever tweet on live while the show was being broadcast. Lynn Paulo, Kerry Washington, and the entire staff would basically meet up, open up a couple of bottles of wine, and tweet about all the outfits that everybody had on. Farfetch used to produce the next morning where everything was and where you could buy. The same thing on Gossip Girl. When we were at InStyle, the next day after Gossip Girl came on, we basically produced online everything and wherever you can buy it. This was the first time, basically, where they actually used a TV show to sell a product. They created 2 lines for the limited, or both of which sold out. The funny thing is that when people look at her clothes, people always talk about everything being fashion, how fashion-forward Kerry Washington was. Actually, the coat on the left is Ferragamo. The coat on the right is Max Mara. It was all about the styling. It was all about showing classics in a beautiful way. Plus the fact is Kerry is such an incredibly strong and powerful presence that that you couldn't take your eyes off of her. The mystery of the show is, if you remember, if you watch it, she had an obsession with Prada bags. During the entire length of the show, there were 57 Prada bags. So I asked Lynn Paulo, I said, do you have the Prada bags? She says, no. I said, well, Carrie must have them. She said, no. I said, who has them? She said, they're locked up in Disney vaults. And we have no idea if we can ever get them out again. Shitz Creek. This show is just simply delicious. And the funny thing is, I didn't get it when it first came out. I just didn't. I thought it was, I didn't understand the humor. I didn't like the family. They just annoyed me. And then, if you remember, during COVID, when they had that sort of remote Emmy thing, Shitz Creek won everything. Best comedy, best actor, best supporting actress, everything. And I'm going, okay, I must be missing something. And I'll be honest, I went back to the episode. In the third season, it's episode number 6, when Dan Levy meets David, who'll be his future boyfriend. And David decides that in town he's going to sing "Simply the Best" to I just forgot Dan Levy's character's name. Somebody help me. No, David's the good guy. Oh, Patrick. No, Patrick's David is in. Patrick's the boyfriend. Patrick's going to sing "Simply the Best" to David, and David, of course, is ready to pull the fire alarm, because this is going to be totally and completely embarrassing. Instead, it is probably one of the sweetest, most romantic moments I have ever seen in a television show. It gets me choked up now. And it was such a gorgeous expression of love. And I realized, you know what? I've gotten this show completely wrong, because this show is about, through thick and thin, your family is everything. And that really is what Shitz Creek is about. What makes the show fun is Moira's ridiculous wardrobe. And the amazing thing is, this is a show that Dan and Eugene Levy basically shopped around and could not sell. So who bought the show? The Canadian Broadcasting System. The Canadian Broadcasting System is not exactly 20th Century Fox or Universal. Okay, they had a budget of about $18 for this show. There was no money. They had a budget of $20,000 for costumes for the entire season. Remember I told you that Dynasty in the 80s had $35,000? Okay? We're now in 2010s, and their budget's $20,000. Deborah Hanson, who was the costume designer, and Dan Levy used to spend nights on Etsy. Looking at everything. They used to looking for bargains, they used to borrow clothes from the Real, and then buy clothes from the Real, and then give them back. So nobody was allowed to eat on the set because you couldn't stand the clothes. But nevertheless, they managed to dress Moira in Prada, Rick Owens, Dries, Saint Laurent, Neil Barrett. It was incredible what they got on her. And the cool thing was that Catherine O'Hara patterned herself against Daphne Guinness. And that's how she saw herself in the show. How many of you have watched Killing Eve? It's the sickest thing I've ever seen on television. And I could not take my eyes off it. It was just the most twisted creature. Villeneuve, who is Jodie Comer over there on the right, Villeneuve is an assassin with absolutely, positively no remorse, not a bit. Her defining scene is she's sitting in a cafe, having a coffee, watching a little girl get a dish of ice cream. And the little girl smiles at her, and she smiles back at her, and they play, and they make a little eye contact. And then Jodie Comer, as Eve, gets up and walks away, and walks by the little girl's table, and takes the dish and upends it and throws it in her lap. And walks away and never misses a step. She could talk to a grandfather, basically with the grandchild, as she's taking a 12-inch spike, skinny spike, and putting it into his eye. And then leaves. And then when asked, why do you do this? Her answer is, I don't know. But she does have a reason. Why? Because every single time she kills, she goes shopping. She is an obsessive shopper, and she used the money she made from assassinating people to buy clothes. And not only is she a shopper, but her taste is incredibly forward. Loewe, McQueen, Rick Owens, Charlotte Knowles, Hussein Chalayan, Comme des Garçons. Her clothes were incredible. Regardless of whether you like the show or not, you have to watch it for the clothes alone. That Mary Goddard dress, that pink dress that she wears that to it's a pair of Balenciaga boots, and she wears that to the shrink. That in 2018 was the #1 Halloween costume for women in drags. And I remember at the very end, Eve, basically Sandra Oh's character and Jodie Comer's character become very close, and a weird connection. And she says, she's watching these people walk by on the Sandra Oh's watching people walk by on the bridge and going, I think I used to be like, did I used to be like them? And to which Eve goes, you mean badly dressed? This was the show. Bridgerton is the show that saved us during COVID. It became a worldwide phenomenon. The incredible thing is, here's a costume drama. Why would a costume drama get people so excited? Well, it's a costume drama that for some reason, why are we going to a ball and dancing to Madonna, Taylor Swift, and Rihanna? Why do we somehow have hair and makeup that has nothing to do with the 19th century? Why do we have a cast that is so ridiculously beautiful that at one point, Renee Jean Page was actually defined as having the perfect face for a man, according to the golden triangle. The golden ratio. What they did in this show was the idea for Ellen Mirojnick, who did costumes, and Lynn Powell, who did it after, was they were not supposed to be period in pure period, but to take the concept of period and then adapt it to a modern sensibility. Of course, Phoebe Dynevor basically is the jewel in the first season, and she's always, everybody else is in brighter colors, she's always in pale blue. Everybody else is wearing tons of jewelry. She wears a little diamond. That diamond, you couldn't find that diamond. Every single jeweler who made a little diamond absolutely sold out. But what was more incredible was, here we are with a costume drama, and yet at the end of the first season, there was an 80% rise in people looking for corsets, 63% rise in people looking for long gloves, 146% rise in people looking for floral dresses, 150% rise in people looking for empire waists. The second season, then they had the audacity, in the second season, these people who were so gorgeous we loved, they got rid of them. Remember? It was Sharma, and it was Jonathan Bailey. Okay, and you have a second cast who's just as gorgeous, and sure enough, the rise, there was an 80% height in waistcoats, an 80% increase in military blazers. Even just to see what would happen, I ordered a croquet set and told that I had to wait a month. Bridgerton changed the entire, and if you look at fashion, the fashion has just come down the runway in both last season and this season. You see corset dressing, you see long gloves on the red carpet, you see men's clothes being much tighter and closer to the body, and it's all because of Bridgerton. If you ask me what is the most influential show in America right now, here's your answer. RuPaul's Drag Race. Drag is nothing new. Robin Williams went to drag. Flip Wilson did drag. Milton Berle did drag. Dustin Hoffman did drag. Tom Hanks. Tyler Perry, of course. Patrick Swayze. The difference is, at the end of the day, all those actors took off their costumes. These women ain't screwing around. This is their life. And I don't know if, when they first started RuPaul's Drag Race, if they expected the resonance more than just a show that would be fun and entertaining. But somehow, when you peel back curtains and you start talking to people, and you suddenly realize, here's a segment of our population that has been off to the side, pushed off to the side, even by LG people as well. And suddenly these people had vulnerabilities. They had feelings. They had hopes. They had wishes. They had stories to tell. And they got to us. And they got to us. They were also wickedly talented, and their clothes were spectacular, from Zaldi. And suddenly, the perception of drag changed completely. Two things happened. Three things, actually. One, it made us realize that these people were not clowns, that these people were vulnerable, like all of us are, because, like as RuPaul says, once you go to your closet and you get dressed, everybody's in drag. But you realize it was time to scratch the surface. You started rooting for these people because of their insecurity, like we have, because of our vulnerability, like we have. It also did something else. When you look at Timothée Chalamet on a red carpet wearing a red sequin backless jumpsuit, when you look at Jimmy Allen, who's a country western singer wearing a red sequin jacket, when you look at Brad Pitt in a skirt, a green skirt, and when you look at I'm Just Ken, he has worn a different color suit, not black, not blue. It's either been yellow, pink, green, blue during the entire Oscar process. What RuPaul's Drag Race did was it broke down all the barriers about what used to be masculine and feminine in dress. Remember, up until the beginning of the end of the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, men were peacocks equally as well as women were. And what RuPaul's Drag Race is, it restored that kind of balance again, that men could dress up and still be great. Not only that, it also gave drag queens a legitimacy. They have careers. They're in clubs. They're in straight clubs. They're not just in gay clubs. They're selling out halls. RuPaul's Drag Race has now won 9 Emmys. RuPaul basically holds the record for the most amount of Emmys ever won by a host. And basically, as she said, work your pussy. Maybe that's. Now, it's hard for me to see, but does anybody have any questions?
Here are the questions.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so what was my favorite designer in the 80s, and whom do I miss the most? Well, it went from the 80s to the 90s. Gianni Versace, without a doubt. People use the word genius. They think their chicken sandwich is genius. The word gets thrown around. Oh, that Chick-fil-A sandwich is genius. No, it's not. It's a sandwich. Okay? Gianni's understanding and boldness of sexuality, his exuberance of seeing people being beautiful, his willingness to objectify not just women but men as well, changed, I think, our entire perception of beauty. I was lucky enough to be his friend. He was a fascinating man because he loved opera. He loved art. He took us on a trip once to visit all the Palladian villas north of Venice, and it was like going on a tour with a scholar from Cambridge. He also was a master tailor. Not only were his clothes fabulous to look at, but they were also unbelievably made. But his exuberance about life, I remember I had the good fortune to show him around Miami when he first got there, because he was on his way to Cuba, and his flight got delayed. He spent 10 minutes at the news cafe and canceled his flight to Miami, to Cuba, and basically he said, "Darling, this place is perfection. Beauty, beauty, beauty." And that's what he saw. He once, remember the great Versace silk shirts? They were $1,500 each. I remember, I had a couple. We had discounts. Okay, we had a couple. And I remember getting her dressed to go out, and he says, "Darling, you wear that shirt all wrong." I said, "What do you mean wrong?" Remember, in the 90s, roller skating was very big. Miami, too. He says, "Darling," he says, "you need 2 shirts. The first shirt you wear open, like this, throw across your back. The second shirt you wear around your waist. Then you pair a bathing suit on, and then you skate like the breeze." And it worked. He was just a marvelous man. TV shows are full of characters. Why no appreciation for patina? I don't understand. All clothing on this show is new. Why is everything new? Simply because vintage doesn't wear well. That's number one. Most vintage that's of any quality is already in a museum, like this incredible museum across the way from us. When I was in my early 20s in the 70s, I was incredibly tall and incredibly skinny, and it was an economic downturn, and I could never find clothes that fit me, so I started wearing vintage clothes. And I basically, throughout the 70s and 80s, I wore vintage all the time. As the time went on, the availability of vintage clothes became less and less and less and less. People would buy bundles in resale shops, and out of those bundles, there might be 100 pieces, and 70 would be good, and then 50 would be good, and then 30 would be good. The problem with patina is that those clothes don't exist anymore. They're not made, those clothes are not made anymore. Remember, there's a finite number of pieces that can be vintage, the same way there's a finite number of vintage cars. So the reason why you don't see them on television is because those clothes don't exist. For the marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Donna Zuchowski's clothes are so extraordinary. Those clothes for the entire main cast, and especially for Mrs. Maisel, were created by 40 seamstresses working at Steiner Studios. My grandmother was a seamstress and used to work in the garment district. And I walked in to interview Donna for the section of Mrs. Maisel, and it was like walking back in time. All of those clothes are brand new. They don't look it, but they're brand new because there was no ability to buy those vintage clothes because they don't exist. What are your thoughts on the current mob wife, Sopranos aesthetic and fashion? Blech. Why? Look, clothing you always have to approach clothing with a sense of humor or you're screwed. It's fashion. I'm sorry. This is not Russian history. It's fashion. If you don't get dressed with a sense of humor, you belong someplace else. Okay? The world is... And especially ever since the pandemic has hit, fashion is probably not exactly foremost in everybody's mind. I think basically your home, your health, your family hopefully comes before that. Nevertheless, you want to look good. The Sopranos is a TV drama. And it's great if it inspires in a way, like Bridgerton in a way, but if it inspires you to look like a cartoon, or inspires you to look like... And speaking of cartoons, The Real Housewives of, fill in the blank, okay? Look, they're in the book. I can't deny them. I can't stand them, but I can't deny them. Though I will say, if you're going to watch any of them, you have to watch The Real Housewives of Dubai, because they leave everybody in the dust. Nobody has more money than they do. In Dubai, it actually can cost as much money to get a license plate with either a single letter, or a single numeral than it does to buy the Rolls Royce. And that show is like bananas. But there's nothing... I'm old-fashioned enough to still believe that people should look beautiful when they walk out the door. It's always been my mom used to tell me that you should always get dressed and leave the house as if you're going to run into somebody you went to high school with. Think about it. Because how many times have you left to run out and do an errand, or you came out of spin class or whatever it is, and you run into somebody you haven't seen in forever, and you stand there and you go, oh my God, I just got out of class, and it was really, I got to go do my hair later, and it's just, but it's so good to see you. And you walk away, and your friend goes, God, she looks like shit. You will never get away with it. You always have to leave the house looking good. So the mob wife thing, I'm not in the least bit interested in. What do I think about the current fashion trends, such as, what's the same question? Mob wives. So we went through that one again. Okay. Is there any more here? Wait. No, I don't have any more here. Does anybody have a question for me? I can't see. I can't, if you do stand up, because it's hard for me to see. What?
What is your favorite show to watch versus your favorite show to wear from any era?
Can you repeat it on the microphone?
What was that?
Can you repeat it on the microphone?
Yes, what are my favorite shows to watch, and what are my favorite shows to wear? Mad Men. I love those clothes. I think that's the coolest a man can ever look. Is that kind of fit? I like fitted clothing. I work very hard not to look like a mess, and I would like to show myself off with clothes that fit me right. So I think that the shows that I like to watch, gosh, it's a really strange. I think Bridgerton is brilliant. I thought Queen Charlotte was pretty wonderful. David, what are we watching? What? Yeah, okay. David and I happen to love watching any kind of singing or dancing competition because it's what replaces variety shows. They don't have people spinning plates anymore, but they have people singing, and also their stories are incredible because they're just. For some reason, on singing shows, everybody comes from a single-parent family. I realize how blessed I am to have had two parents growing up, and two extraordinary parents, for that matter. But you hear these stories, and you see these people fighting, basically coming back from adversity. It's very humbling. It's very humbling. It makes you root for them more. It makes you very grateful. I think for the life that you have, and if you're not grateful, then you're a fool. Because anyone sitting in this room right now is blessed. Trust me, you are. So, like that. And then I have to admit, I also love, for any of you who've seen it, Reacher. I think he's the fiercest person on the face of the earth. And the violence in the show is so over the top, and I can't help it. It makes me laugh. Somebody's standing there and gets run over the car in 2 seconds. And the show just makes me laugh. I know you want me to say Capote and the Swans. What? Oh, and the best variety show on all of television is Graham Norton. No one is even close. This man, first of all, he is witty, he is smart, he is clever, and he gets, last week on his couch was Cher, Emma Stone, Timothée Chalamet, and Tom Hanks at once. And they're forced to have an actual conversation. But they're not there promoting. They all sit there for the entire hour together. If go watch it on BBC America, it is the most brilliant, funny talk show ever. Because it reaches the other thing. Capote and the Swans, I know other people just asked me when I walked in. It looks really good. The problem is In Cold Blood is one of the greatest books I've ever read. Terrified me. I've read it twice. Kept me up at night screaming terrible dreams. Okay. He was a nasty little crap. He was a rotten little man. And you're watching a show that's just all about vituperativeness. That's all about being ugly and cruel. I don't get it. There's enough lousiness in this world right now. You know this. We don't have to talk about politics or anything. There's enough misfortune and ugliness in this world right now. Why do you sit in front of your television and watch people be more miserable again? Why? I'm sorry, maybe I just don't call that entertaining. I like to feel better when I get up and walk away. And shows like that don't do it for me. Okay, so any more else? One more, and then, there's one over there, and then I'm going to go sign books. What? Yes, sir.
Who was your favorite character evolution through clothing?
My favorite character, what?
What character was your favorite to see evolve through clothing?
Dick Van Dyke. When I was 10, I went to see Bye Bye Birdie. It was the first Broadway musical I ever saw. I was jealous of Dick Van Dyke, one, because he was playing opposite Cheetah Rivera, who I thought was the greatest thing I'd ever seen on a stage. And two, I identified with Dick Van Dyke because he was tall, he was gangly, he was short of being handsome. He was kind of handsome and goofy looking at the same time. He fell over his own legs. When I was 12, I was 5'3". When I was 13, I was 5'8". There really is such a thing as growing pains. I would fall all over my feet. I wasn't allowed to clear the table because I would push everything like that because I had no understanding of my limbs. But Dick Van Dyke used to be dressed on the Dick Van Dyke Show by Botany 500. It used to come under the credits at the end. I used to nag my father to take me to Botany 500 because I was 12. I wanted a suit from Botany 500 because I wanted to look like Dick Van Dyke. He is still my favorite performer. thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to be outside signing books, so I hope I get to meet a whole bunch of you.